Ruth and I started doing genealogy forever ago. And you remember Tina? She traced her, we traced her ancestry back to 1720, and that's why she got to be the leader of the parade in Tucson. Prescott. Well, this is her bigger little sister. I know. I'm the bigger little sister. This is her more mature sister. Okay. And so Ruthie Corbett Cross, she's the one that we dedicated to, and also Mom Stratton, our first brochure to. Remember 2 years ago? And this is her baby right here.
Thank you.
We love Ruthie very much.
Thanks. Okay, I'm legit now. I was saying that I wanted to speak a little bit about Jessie, Aunt Jessie, we always called her, because at our last reunion there was lots of Corbetts, and we heard a lot about the Corbetts, and lots about the Strattons, and lots about the Treats. But Jessie only had one daughter, and who I also would like to say a few words about. And her one daughter didn't have any children, so they have no, large families to represent them. But several of us have fond memories of both Aunt Jessie and her daughter Barbara. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about them. I have not done any kind of research. This may be totally illegitimate information. It's simply gathering stories that people told me and wonderful photographs that were sent in. And that I would really like to thank not only my mother, but Teresa Dickinson and her mother, Barbara Gorilla. Is Barbara here? Thank you, Barbara. And Pat Valley, Teresa's aunt, who is there. And Teresa, way in the back, because they sent in these wonderful photographs and lots of good information. So, Jessie was born in Tucson, December 19, 1877. And there's some great photographs of her as a young child on the top row there. She went to Catholic elementary school here in Tucson. There was not any sort of secondary school available. So she was sent probably with Mary Hughes Sheehan, although we're not sure of that, back to Tennessee to music school. She had a lot of musical aptitude. And she studied piano, and she became a piano teacher, and she performed as a pianist, and that's how she made her living. And I think it's great that, was it Elizabeth who sang for us? It's wonderful that we got some musical genes that are getting passed down, so obviously that works. When she came back to Tucson, she attended the University of Arizona, and she did graduate, so she was a college graduate before the turn of the century, which was pretty unusual for a woman. And she then moved to Los Angeles, married L.F. Stradling. I believe his first name was Lafayette, and he was a bookkeeper. They were married in 1904, and her daughter Barbara was born in L.A. in 1907, and Mr. Stradling died in 1910, so she was widowed at a fairly early age and had a 3-year-old daughter to raise. So she obviously didn't have an easy time of it. My grandfather, Hiram Corbett, was attending secondary school in San Francisco during the 1906 earthquake, and he remembers that Jessie essentially took him in 1906 because the building that he was staying in, I guess a dormitory, was destroyed. And he recalled and told my mother that they lived in a tent in a park, and they would kind of just go out and scrounge for food and water in the aftermath of the earthquake. So this must have been an interesting time, but obviously it showed that this lady had a lot of gumption, and she really was a steadfast character. At some point, I don't know when, she moved back to Los Angeles and married Orville McReynolds, who worked for the railroad. I don't know when they were married, I don't know how long the marriage lasted, but he also died, so she was widowed a second time. And during the Depression, or possibly before that, she moved in with her daughter Barbara and her son-in-law and lived with them the rest of her life. So I do remember they had a wonderful house that was located at 854 South Citrus Avenue in LA. Just coincidentally, I was in Los Angeles a week ago for a business meeting, and I was at the corner of Wilshire and Citrus Avenue, and I had no idea his office was that close to their house. So on our way back to the airport, I asked the taxi driver to just take a little detour, and sure enough, the house is still there. So if anybody's interested, go look. It's a beautiful old house. It has a great big bay window for a dining area. They had a grand piano in the living room, and you never even noticed it when you walked into the room. It was a huge, huge room. And Aunt Jessie gave her music lessons in the house, and she also traveled throughout the city giving lessons to students. I know that as well as classical music, she enjoyed playing jazz and honky-tonk music, so she did have a little bit of a playful spirit. My mother remembers going out to dinner with her at very expensive restaurants. I think it was probably my grandfather treating. And she was raised and taught never to waste anything. So she had a large handbag that she lined with plastic. And if there was any leftover food, it went into the plastic lined handbag before they went home, no matter how fancy the restaurant. Which of course, horrified my mother, but there was no arguing with Aunt Jessie. She always dressed in dark colors, wore a hat, gloves, dressed very formally, and several people who gave me their remembrances tell this, that she always wore dark colors. Yeah, when you look at these photographs, several times she's shown wearing light colored dresses, so obviously, maybe just for special family occasions, she wore dark colors. Everybody recalls, including myself, that she insisted on proper manners. She was quite strict, and no matter how young you were expected to sit still and behave. You were not allowed to squirm or fidget or interrupt the conversation, etc., etc. So during our visits to their house, we often would escape these onerous rules by taking their Scotty dog for a walk. And that was a good way of getting out of the house and out from underneath Aunt Jessie's evil eye. But she did have a sense of humor, and she was a lot of fun. And to prove that she had a playful nature, several people have remembered that she loved to watch wrestling on TV. And one person even recalled that she would travel alone at night on the bus because she never liked to drive. She refused to drive a car. Living in LA, that couldn't have been easy. But she would get on the bus by herself and travel to professional wrestling matches in Long Beach or Santa Monica. And Gorgeous George was her very favorite wrestler. So if any of you are into wrestling, I guess that's genetic too, unfortunately. She did have a soft spot for her family, and she was very proud of her family. And she was very good to her own daughter and to others. Barbara Barilla says, Jessie was my best friend, and recalls that she paid for Barbara to travel to LA. She helped pay for some of her schooling. And Barbara Barilla worked for Barbara, Jessie's daughter, for a short time as a secretary. Jessie's daughter, Barbara Murphy, owned her own business. It was a secretarial service, so that was nice of her to help out by employing the relatives. My mother remembers Jessie and Emma and Mary having spirited discussions about parties that they went to in Tucson, what people were wearing, what was served, who attended, who was flirting with whom, things that happened decades before. So they were very proud of their heritage, and they recall their times in Tucson happily. And my mother describes Jessie as a strong, independent woman with a great sense of humor, love for family and young people, proud of her heritage, and the belief that music could heal many ills. So I think that's a pretty good way to be remembered. photographs of Barbara, Jessie's daughter, and as a young girl, and moving down into these smaller ones as she's getting older. And Barbara grew up in California, lived in California her whole life, although she did come to visit Tucson, I know, several times. And she was married in 1935. Her husband, Charles, who's shown with her down here, was a designer at Northrop Aviation, very talented and interesting guy, also with a great sense of humor. And after his death in 1970, Barbara sold this wonderful old house that they all lived in and moved into an apartment. I think he died around, yeah, it was December of 1970. Barbara lived another 21 years, and she was on the board of the LA County Art Museum. She also did a lot of volunteer work for the opera and symphony. So she was very active in civic affairs and just a wonderful, wonderful person. So I'd urge you to come up and take a look at some of these photos. Some of them are tiny, but it's really interesting. You can see that Barbara and Jessie and Atanasia, talking about noses, they all have the exact same kind of broad little pug nose, and it's so obvious that they're all related. So that was Jessie and Barbara. They were great people too. Thanks.